This is Evolutionary Radio. This is your host, Trevor Kouritzin. Once again, we're coming at you live from the Evolutionary Radio headquarters. As always, my co-host, Steve Smee, is joining me.
Hey, good evening, gentlemen. And we have a special guest once again on the show.
Dr. Mike Israetel. Dr. Mike Israetel, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, folks.
So, Dr. Mike, let's start off the show by you just telling our listeners a little bit about yourself. What got you into lifting? What gave you that crazy idea to get a PhD? Give our listeners a little bit of your background info.
Sure. So I originally came with my family from Russia to America in 1991 when I was 7 years old. And then I went to high school, or elementary, middle, and high school in Metro Detroit, right next to Windsor, Canada. I've been to Canada a whole lot, so that's cool. And then I did my undergrad at the University of Michigan. And when I was in high school, actually, I started wrestling, and then I started lifting for wrestling, and I fell in love with lifting. So by the time I did my undergrad in Michigan, I had started the Michigan Powerlifting Club, and I was a competitive powerlifter. And then I did my master's degree in North Carolina at Appalachian State. It was in strength and conditioning. I started to learn more about the science of everything, and I was very, very passionate about it. Personal trained for a year in New York City, and then decided I didn't know enough, so I went and got a PhD at East Tennessee State University in sports science, sport physiology. And then I was a professor for a couple of years, and that entire time I switched from powerlifting to bodybuilding for no real good reason except for just liking it. And I picked up grappling, and now I'm a competitive Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu grappler. So that's the deal.
That's a lot of stuff to tick off your bucket list.
I guess, yeah. It was never on my bucket list really until I started doing it, so.
So I'm curious, bodybuilding versus powerlifting, which one did you enjoy more?
I really liked powerlifting when I did it. I liked competing. I liked getting super fired up for competition. But then I started reading bodybuilding magazines, and it just looked really sweet. It looked cool to look like that. So I started trying to train more for hypertrophy, and then I kind of fell in love with that. I don't enjoy one more or the other much. There's something about going to limit weights that just can't be replaced, really, like super heavy weights. But I love training for reps. Sounds lame, but getting a pump is really cool. Seeing your body transform is really cool. So it's a toss-up. I currently do bodybuilding, at least in part because I'm too injured to be any good at powerlifting. Maybe never was that good to begin with. But I'm getting pretty jacked for bodybuilding, so that's kind of fun.
You kind of sound like Steve. Steve has a background doing powerlifting as well.
Yeah, a lot of folks that come from powerlifting end up in a variety of strength sports because I think powerlifting is such a good base. I mean, you get big and strong, and then you can do all kinds of stuff after that. So I think actually, if somebody likes strength sports and they're not really sure where they want to start, powerlifting is never a bad place because you can always branch out and do other stuff.
Yeah, I started powerlifting early. I think that it really builds, like you said, a strong base as you get older. It's so easy for me to put on muscle now at an older age, and I think that has a lot to do with the muscle memory I put in as a teenager. Is that scientifically accurate, or is that maybe just a coincidence?
No, I think it's very accurate. I mean, if you were successful at powerlifting, you probably had good genetics to begin with, so it's easy to put on body mass. But that being said, having once been strong and jacked, it's way easier to return to being strong and jacked and go even further than it is to get there in the first place. So muscle memory, it turns out, is a very, very real thing. Recent research has supported that very, very well. There's actually some structural changes that happen to muscle tissue which are probably almost permanent. And it's kind of like as soon as you get to a certain size, if you ever lose that size, getting it back is infinitely easier than getting it for the first time. So there's definitely something to that.
I think the evidence of that is in professional sports. You have a professional athlete tear an ACL or, do something, a major injury, and they're out for the whole year. And then they come back the next year and have a great season. It's like, what the hell? Like, how are they able to even come back from that? They weren't even able to walk, and they were able to come back. So, I mean, that's great evidence. What about the flip side, though? What about someone who never exercised before, and let's say they're in their 30s or 40s? Is that going to be a struggle for them to, make any? Are they basically starting from scratch?
Well, definitely. It's kind of maybe not a twofold problem, but they're certainly starting from scratch. And another issue is that because they're older, they don't adapt as quickly. They don't recover as well. They might have some nagging injuries just from life. So it's definitely more difficult to gain muscle the later you start past, your late teens, early 20s. So, if you start at 18 versus 16, I don't think there's a real big difference there. But I will say people who start older do have some significant advantages. One of them is that they tend to be less insane about doing stupid stuff. And they're less likely to get hurt. They're more likely to seek professional help, get educated about training. Most of the people I know that start training when they're a little older go about it the way the way that people of their age that have been training for forever are now going about it. They just haven't, experienced those painful lessons of injury, et cetera, or poor programming or program hopping. They could skip all that because their maturity levels are high to begin with. I mean, I don't know if you guys were training back when you were in your teens. I sure was. And my God, the kind of stuff I did, if I had a time machine, I would teleport back to my 16-year-old self and just beat the crap out of myself for being an idiot about training and life for that matter.
Yeah. No, I started weight training, probably like my sophomore year of high school. And then I got really serious into it junior and senior year. So I was like, 16, 17, 18 is when I started really, really serious. And I was weight training 6 times a week back then.
There you go. Probably a little too much. So
yeah. But it's funny, our coach would make us come in on Saturday to weight train, and we'd only get Sunday off. So it was like, it was really weird. Let me ask you this, because I was also a weightlifting coach myself. And a lot of parents would come to me and they're like, I don't want my kid lifting weights. I don't want my kid having their growth stunted. I don't want to have my kid getting injured. And I would try to explain to them, I'm like, look, weightlifting is actually more safe. How can you tell me you don't want your kid doing this when you are okay with them playing football? So, I mean, you as a doctor, and I hear this too from doctors as well about growth being stunted, about injuries and stuff like that. What's your take on teenagers lifting weights?
So there's absolutely no direct evidence that lifting causes any kind of stunted growth. That's not to say that it's impossible, because the absence of evidence doesn't indicate evidence of absence. But if you do a little bit of thinking about it, it starts to look very improbable. First of all, there's just unable to detect through massive surveys that people who train with weights as children are any shorter or anything like that compared to other folks. So that's problem number one. You'd think something would show up. Second of all, they have examined the amount of force that goes through growth plates, which are parts of bone that are still expanding. Turns out jumping and running are multiples of times more forceful than anything a teenager can squat or leg press or anything like that, or deadlift. So if you're concerned about high forces disrupting growth plates, you had better never let your child sprint or jump, which of course would be insane. And last but not least, they've done a whole lot of examination on what types of activities for young adults are more or less dangerous. And weightlifting is very, very low on the list. There are a variety of activities that are way more dangerous. Of course, American football. Basketball is way more dangerous for a number of reasons. One is when you run and jump up with multiple other people and you land wrong. That's a big deal. In weightlifting, you're not really landing anywhere. And funny enough, the most statistically dangerous sport in the United States is competitive cheerleading. That because of the spinal injury factor, being basket tossed, like 10 meters into the air. So that the idea that weightlifting is sort of going to cause stunted growth or is unsafe or whatever is somewhere between highly lacking in evidence and very, very improbable.
Yeah, so those of you parents, those of you young guys listening to this, your parents keep telling you don't weightlift for that reason. Let them listen to this because so many kids have told me when I was a weightlifting coach, their parents won't let them weight train. So that's complete horseshit.
Mike,
Probably.
Mike, after this episode, you're going to have like 100 moms emailing you.
Oh, I'm well prepared for that sort of thing. I've coached athletes for a long time. A lot of times parents just want to hear from somebody relatively informed, and they're just scared. It's not like they have these crazy convictions. They're just sort of erring on the safe side. And when you tell them it's okay, a lot of them just go, oh, all right, well, that's great. As opposed to being like, no, I know it's going to kill my son or something like that. Although you do have diehards, I guess.
So Dr. Israetel, our first listener question is about weight belts. So the person asking this question is a physique competitor. So he has kind of like a male model type physique. And he wants to know, what's the deal with weight belts when lifting heavy? You hear some people say that using a weight belt will keep your waist small. Other people will say using a weight belt will actually make your waist bigger. What are your thoughts on weight belts when training if the goal is physique development? You don't care about how much weight you're lifting.
Yeah. Unless you're taking peptide-based performance-enhancing drugs, you probably are no risk of growing your waist anymore one way or another. If you wear a lifting belt while lifting weights that you normally lift without a belt, it decreases the intra-abdominal pressure and the muscle activation in the core. So that could potentially reduce the size of your waist, or at least not expand it to a size it would otherwise be. If you take a weightlifting belt because when you put on a belt, you can usually lift more. It's pretty well established. If you actually use it to lift more than you could without a belt, then the muscle activity is usually about the same as it is without one, but the increased intra-abdominal pressure that results lets you lift more. So if you use a belt, you probably won't get any bigger of a core than you otherwise would, probably the same, but you can lift more weight, which makes your legs and back and all the other muscles you're using bigger or stronger. If you use a belt with what we call submaximal weights that aren't super heavy, then you probably either nothing happens or potentially your waist doesn't grow as much, although it would be a tiny, tiny difference in drug-free competitors. So there's not really a huge downside to lifting a belt. One of the reasons that we usually like folks to wait a couple of years before lifting a belt is, well, first of all, most people just don't need it because they're not physique competitors and the differences are tiny. And then also we want folks to have good proprioception, sort of body awareness. So when we teach people how to lift weights, we want them to be unencumbered by any kind of artificial devices so they can really learn how to move their bodies, how to brace their core for heavy squatting and deadlifting and things like that. And eventually they sort of graduate to using a belt when they need one because they're now training heavy enough to really benefit from one, and when their technique's well developed enough so that the added confusing variable of how to properly use a belt isn't there. So do you have to get a belt? No. If you're a physique competitor, can you clip one on for exercise to maybe keep your waist down? Sure. And unless you're running a crap load of insulin and growth hormone, which physique competitors don't do anyway, that's usually just almost completely moot point of an issue.
So Dr. Israetel, you briefly mentioned peptides that would enlarge your waist. I know our listeners would kill me if I didn't ask to pick your brain on this a little bit more. Which peptides in particular have you found to increase waist size in athletes?
Yeah, well, we're really not sure, but there's probably two things that are sort of responsible for waist growth, or maybe three. One is just being bigger everywhere and lifting heavier weights and eating a lot of food. It's going to expand your waist to some extent. Another one is the use of exogenous insulin, particularly, which probably hypertrophies everything, including your waist. And the last and definitely not least is just taking a whole lot of drugs, period, usually creates some sort of degradations in health that enlarge organs. And that organ enlargement is both a factor of decreased health and the fact that anabolics in general of all kinds grow the organs as well as the muscles. So if you take a crap load of gear, if you shoot a lot of insulin, and if you get enormous, you're probably going to have a bigger gut. If you don't do any one of those things, you're probably not going to have a bigger waist at all. So if we look at physique competitors, they usually don't shoot insulin. They're usually not gigantic. And hopefully, for their sake, they're not running a whole lot of gear, because to get to be 180 or 200 pounds, you just don't need that much. So they don't really have to worry about waist stuff. Folks that are doing the big Ramey approach to bodybuilding, they have to be more considerate of all of those factors.
Steve, you got anything to chime in before I ask the second listener question?
No, go to the next one.
So Dr. Israetel, our second question is, for an advanced lifter, so someone, let's say, who's been training, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, what is the most efficient way to build muscle? You hear training muscles twice a week, you hear training muscles once a week, you hear full body, you hear upper lower splits, you hear push pull legs. In your opinion, what's the fastest way for an advanced lifter to put on muscle?
Yeah, just doing things more properly in general is a good idea. Here's what I mean by that. I could go through all the little tidbits of advice, but I'd be missing a lot of things because there's a lot to say about volume, intensity, relative loading, exercise selection, frequency, blah, 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 blah. But all that stuff is available online, and there's tons of things I can recommend. There's whole textbooks on it. So it's a complicated process. There's no tricks. But here's where we get to sort of the crux of the answer. When you're a beginner, almost the definition of a beginner is that beginners can grow with not being super consistent and relatively thoughtlessly. You could just go lift weights and sort of eat food and you'll gain as a beginner most times, right? Those are, what are they called? Noob gains, right? Easy gains. And that's what beginners do. So if you're a beginner, you don't have to give a huge amount of thought to much of anything at all. You become an intermediate in some sense when you experience your first stalls in progress. And then you have to make sure you hit the basics correctly. Train hard multiple times per week. You might have to start splitting up your body parts because you're getting bigger and stronger. You can't train your whole body every day like you may be used to. And you got to be more consistent with meals, specifically, getting nutrition to be intentionally less calories when you're cutting fat and intentionally more calories when you're gaining muscle. Because as a beginner, you could kind of do both at the same time. When you're intermediate, not so much. So intermediate's kind of the first time where you have to really put some thought into your lifting to keep getting good gains. Otherwise, you get maybe not so great gains or no gains at all. Now, an advanced lifter, almost again, the definition of advanced is you got to get things real well sorted out in order to make consistent gains. An advanced lifter can be defined as if doesn't do things very well, will go with no gains at all, right? So in advanced lifting, your recovery becomes a huge issue. How you plan your workouts becomes a huge issue. Finding out a repetition scheme and a periodization scheme and a frequency that works well for you and your goals, depending on how you design your program, that really, really, really starts to play a role. And technique starts to play a really big role from an injury management perspective. It's like you can round back squat when you're a beginner, probably too weak to hurt yourself. When you're intermediate, you might pay some dividends, but maybe just not get the biggest quads because you're using your back to do a lot of the work. When you're advanced, you're probably strong enough to really get hurt. And now you have to pay attention very well to technique, to fatigue management, a lot of that stuff. So the biggest tip I have for advanced lifters is pay attention to the specifics, be very diligent about your programming, try to learn as much as you can because there are no more guaranteed gains. Interestingly enough, one of the funniest questions you'll ever get from, so to speak, advanced people is, how do I get back to noob gains? There is no way to get back to noob gains. They're done. They only occur once. So, well, I guess per our earlier discussion, you could just stop training for a year and there'll be noob gains again, but there won't be any new gains. So pay attention to stuff and and not to be a nitpick. Can I swear on here or not really?
Yeah, you can swear.
Okay, sweet. Not to be a nitpicky cocksucker, but almost the question of what's the fastest way to grow as advanced when you're advanced, you should realize at some point that trying to get fast growth is almost an illusion. Trying to get good, steady, stable, long-term, consistent growth should be the goal of the advanced. Because if you don't get growth like that, when you're advanced, you're probably getting no growth at all.
That was a great analogy, Dr. Israetel. It's almost like the guy thinking 5 grams of gear is going to help him get faster results, and all it does is just give him a bunch of side effects.
Yeah, that side effects are very, very real. Everybody wants to start gear until they actually start it and realize it's not all flowers and rose petals and shit like that.
So before we get into the next subject, I have a user question as well. I kind of want to follow up a little bit on this. Do you work out at like a franchise gym? Where do you work out? Is it a home gym, franchise gym?
I work out at one franchise gym, and I work out at another gym that is privately owned by a very famous person in the strength and conditioning world. Yeah,
the reason I asked that is because there's so many franchise gyms everywhere, and it just seems like, people go in there and they're in there when I go in there, and they're still in there when I leave.
Yeah.
And they go nowhere. They're just spinning their wheels. And I understand there's a genetic element, but come on. I mean, you should see some improvement. What do you think they're doing wrong? And this is a question that I usually like to ask all our guests to kind of get their opinion. I don't think there's one size fits all answer, but I kind of want to hear your opinion as what can they do? Because a lot of them might be listening to this. What can they do to actually start moving forward and not spinning their wheels anymore?
My best advice, just as a shot in the dark, would be to intentionally change your eating to something with a distinct purpose. If you're more advanced, you've been lifting for a while, kind of like I mentioned earlier, you can't just gain muscle and burn fat at the same time anymore. Plus, if you weigh 170 pounds, if you're pretty lean, you're not going to get leaner while building muscle. Even if you could get somehow, this is impossible, but down to 0% fat at 170, okay, you'd be the most jacked 170 pounder out there. But if you want to be huge, there's no 170 pounder ever that's huge by definition, right? So a lot of people kind of sort of spin their wheels and they kind of eat as much food as they sort of feel like. I mean, they eat good foods and multiple meals and protein and all that stuff, but they don't willfully increase their body weight. And by willfully, I mean against what your body's trying to do. The principle of sort of homeostasis, or the concept of homeostasis, is that your body tries to really kind of stay pretty similar conditioning and pretty similar size, and any push is going to make you uncomfortable. So, if you want to get to really big and you're currently 170, then maybe you should take a couple of months to slowly but steadily gain to 180 or 185. Now, a lot of that's going to require eating food you don't really want to eat. And it's going to require consistency about it that you don't want to have. But then when you're at 185, you're going to feel much bigger. You're going to be way stronger. Maybe if you take another phase later on, shorter phase to slowly cut the fat off, maybe lose 5 to 7 pounds, you're going to keep 7 to 10 pounds of muscle or something like that. And all of a sudden, you weigh about 180 with the same body fat you had when you were 170. Notice that didn't happen by accident. There's no way it would. You got to really willfully gain the weight and then willfully lose the fat that you gained. And if you continue to do that sort of thing in cycles of intentional weight gain, cycles of weight maintenance to give your body a break, and cycles of fat loss to get rid of the fat you gain with the muscle, eventually you'll be way more muscular and you'll get very consistent results. Now, they'll slow down. The proportion of muscle you gain slows, but it doesn't stop for a very long time. I was originally, in my freshman year of high school, I was 100 pounds. I'm now 260. I'd gotten up to a pretty fat but pretty muscular drug-free 270 before. Everything I gained was on purpose. Every summer in high school, I ate a whole crap load of food I didn't want to eat. And oh my God, college and master's program, PhD, was just, right now actually, I'm gaining right now on purpose. It was just, eating is bullshit. I hate it. I literally feel like throwing up all the time. Today I did jiu-jitsu and I vomited in a trash can between rolls. It sucks, but you got to sort of take your body and push it into an avenue which it doesn't want to go. I've surpassed a lot of folks that I've known with very good genetics because they weren't interested in pushing their body weight to uncomfortable heights. And one quick thing before I hand it off to you guys, by definition, when you gain weight, you're going to gain some combination of muscle and fat, which means that you're not always going to be as lean as you like, but that's okay because you can burn the fat off later and keep the muscle. It's an investment. It really is. It's like going to college and you don't make any money in college, and actually college costs money, but eventually you get so well qualified, you make crap loads of money and it's worth it in the end. So it sucks in the short term, but it's great in the long term. Same thing with weight gain. It sucks because you have to eat food you don't want, and it sucks because you get worse and worse shape. But eventually you keep the muscle, burn the fat, recycle, repeat, and all of a sudden you're huge and nobody really knows why except for you.
Dr. Israetel, I had a very good bodybuilder mentor me when I was younger. And one piece of advice he gave me is that the meal isn't done when you're full. The meal is done when you hate yourself.
Oh, there you go.
Steve, do you want to ask the listener question you had?
Not quite yet. I kind of want to delve into a little bit because I kind of feel like, now we're in the weight room a little bit. Now we can kind of look around and see people are doing all kinds of things in the weight room. What exactly is happening while people are lifting weights? Let's say halfway through their workout, they're doing 15 sets, 12 sets. They're at 6, 7 sets. What is going on with the muscle at this point? Is it breaking down? Are the muscle fibers ripping up? What's going on from a scientific standpoint?
Well, there's a lot going on. The muscles definitely have an increased blood flow to them. They're producing a lot of metabolites like lactic acid, for example. And they every time you lift a heavy weight, they tear just a little bit. Little parts of them sort of break apart. And also, probably in some way related to the tearing, but probably in other ways too, there are actually proteins inside your muscles, really molecular machines, that are woven into your muscle fibers and detect force. And when they detect a certain amount of force, they actually sort of tell the muscle cell to produce more size. And they start a long signaling cascade of communication that begins when the signal starts during training. And it actually makes muscle grow not during training, but hours later. Muscle grows for hours and then days, and then it slowly stops growing as much. And then hopefully after that stops, you come back and hit it again. Now, when you're halfway through the workout, there's a little bit of damage. There's some metabolites have been sort of accumulated in the muscle. There's quite a bit of blood flow. In addition to that, sort of the blood flow and the metabolite accumulated fluid, the pump, so to speak, stretches out the muscles, which actually creates another stimulus, activates pathways for muscle growth. So if you have like a decent pump, but not a great pump going, and if you've done like plenty of work, but not as much as you could benefit from, then, those pathways are pretty well active. But if you finish your workout and do all the work that you're programmed to do, and if it's an intelligently designed workout, then you get a really good pump, maximize the growth from that perspective, maybe get some growth from some damage, maybe get some growth from some metabolites, because some of those pathways probably signal muscle growth as well. And you definitely get sort of the fully turned up version of the muscle growth pathways that are signaled by these tension receptors. Because they're not just on or off, they're on to a certain degree or a high degree or a low degree. So doing enough work per workout means you're turning them on to a high level, and then they stimulate more muscle growth in the days, et cetera, after. So you don't actually grow in the gym. You turn on growth in the gym, and then it occurs over multiple days with good nutrition and good recovery. Now, of course, if your muscle wants to grow, but you don't eat any protein, you're going to get not so much growth and actually potentially muscle loss.
What happens, in hypothetically speaking, if you were to go and do a workout and then later that day you were to come back and do the exact same workout? Let's say you got a great workout, pumps and everything. You came back later that day. Would that be counterproductive, or would you say, wow, you're getting double the work and you'll have double, you know what I'm saying? Like, would that be counterproductive more? Or would that be like, well, you're stimulating more growth, yada, yada, yada? I'm just curious.
Yeah, totally. So it actually depends a lot on what you do the rest of the week. And it depends on how much work the second workout is. So there's a term that my colleagues and I have coined called the maximum recoverable volume. It's the most amount of training that your body can do and still recover from. And a little less volume than that is, what you can actually adapt to. Because if you use all of your body's resources on recovery, the damage is so great that you end up just fixing damage the rest of the week and you never really get around to muscle growth. This has been shown very well in some recent research, where if you take beginners and you train them really hard right from the onset, until they adapt to the training weeks later, they don't actually grow any muscle. They're just busy recovering. They only start growing muscle when they adapt to the training enough that their sort of maximum recoverable volume goes up to create sort of a window of growth versus just being so hard that the only thing they're getting out of it is recovery. So if the workout you did total, if the two combined workouts are under your maximum recoverable volume for the week, then doing both of them back to back causes a huge amount of fatigue, but a huge stimulus and growth. If you do nothing for those muscle groups the rest of the week, or only very, very easy training, you grow muscle for a long time and then come back the next week, they're bigger and stronger and all that good stuff. On the other hand, if the two workouts combined are in excess of your maximum recoverable volume for the week, then you actually end up just trying to heal and you don't grow. So now, that being said, there are better ways to do things. You'll get good growth if you do workouts back to back, but you'll probably get even better growth if you come back days later and repeat the workout or something similar, because then you have way more energy because you're more recovered, right? If your workout is something you can repeat later that day, is it really that hard of a workout? You know what I mean? Imagine squatting, heavy sets of 10 and then leg pressing heavy sets of 15 and then coming back 3 hours later and repeating that. I mean, I don't think I can do that. So a good way to know if you're training hard enough in one session is, can you repeat the session identically later that day? If the answer is yes, you're probably not training hard enough in any one session in particular.
And this is one more question, because I know Trevor wants to get in. How long should your workouts be? Because this debate seems to rage on. I've heard guys say, oh, you'd be in there an hour and a half. And I've heard other guys say, oh, you can just get in there in 20, 25 minutes, boom, 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 rip through it and be out. Does it matter really? Or is there kind of a sweet spot when it comes to weight training to get what you said earlier, that breakdown of the muscle and the lactic acid and the hormones and all that good stuff?
Yeah. It depends on your goals. Are we talking about getting maximum results?
I mean, let's talk about just we don't want to just try and, spin our wheels. We want to get some results. We want to either, we want to build muscle. We want to build strength.
Sure. I think that the workout length is in large part determined by how many body parts you train. Like if you just train upper body, you just don't have a very long training week because you're missing your whole legs. So your total training demand for the week. And you also have to divide that into the number of sessions you show up. So if you are full body training and you train 3 times a week, your workouts are going to be like 2.5 hours long. That's how much it's going to take to do justice to all the body parts, right? You don't get a good workout for whole body training 30 minutes 3 times a week. That's nonsense for anyone other than beginners. On the other hand, if you have 6 workouts a week, or even you do split 2 a day, so you have 8 or 9 workouts a week, you can start to have shorter sessions because you can split the muscle groups up and split the amount of work up into smaller sessions. There's an advantage to that second approach, potentially. I can't give you an exact figure, but I'll give you an approximate one. After a certain amount of work that you do or time you spend in the gym training hard, you fatigue just acutely during that session so much that you can't really produce a whole lot of force and a whole lot of damage and a whole lot of anything else that amounts to a really, really good workout. And this is something, volume that accumulate after that is something that we call junk volume. And my colleague, Dr. James Hoffman, who co-writes a lot of my books with me, was a big fan of this term. Junk volume is when, you're training all right, it's just not a whole lot's happening. Just to give you guys a quick example of that, you guys know people who will leg press quarter reps or eighth reps while reading the newspaper or scrolling on their iPhone? You guys ever see that? Like sets of 50 or something like that?
Yeah.
So like you could ask the question of what body systems are they really disrupting enough? How much force are they really transducing through those mechanoreceptors we talked about earlier to really get the body to grow? And the answer is not. Okay, they're doing something, but that something either isn't optimally stimulating muscle growth or at all. This is especially true in strength. So if you're doing a strength phase of training a quality that we sports scientists call basic strength, you can't really train the basic strength quality in intermediate and above lifters unless you train with at least 70% of your 1 rep max, probably more like 75 plus. Now, if you train long enough and hard enough, if you're training 2.5 hours, at some point, you're literally not generating the forces that are high enough to make you stronger in any significant extent. So what the hell is it that you're doing there? For weightlifters, like Olympic weightlifters that do high power movements, as soon as you drop below about 90% peak power, you're actually just not training power anymore. You're not improving your explosive abilities. So Olympic weightlifters are real big fans of splitting up their workouts into smaller ones, because after you do like 2 or 3 exercises, you're just not producing enough power to be benefiting much from anything at all. A real quick analogy is if you told a marathon runner who usually runs maybe 26.2 miles or whatever, you had him run a 100-mile run. Well, he can't run 100 miles, so after mile 30, he's just going to be walking. Next question you ask is walking better, making someone better for running? No. I mean, it's work, but it's not very good work. Another quick analogy is making someone do math equations or problems until they can't even read numbers anymore and they're scribbling gibberish. Oh, they're writing stuff down all right, but it's nonsense and it's not math anymore. Or making someone do calculus for long enough to where they're having struggling with algebra, right? You're not learning calculus anymore if you're struggling with division and multiplication and, just basic equations. So at some point, you can work out long enough in one session where the work is just no longer either optimally productive or at all productive. Generally speaking, I'll put it to you guys this way. There are people who train slower and take longer breaks and bring intra-workout nutrition with them that can get away for training longer. But I get skeptical if an individual workout goes longer than 2 hours. If someone is training for longer than 2 hours at a time, I start to give them the skeptical squint, and I think you guys should too. They may have a workable, good reason that actually is effective past 2 hours, but they're going to have to provide that. You know what I mean? It's like if someone tells you that, they saw a dog on the street yesterday, you're going to be like, oh, okay, I have no reason not to believe you. If someone said they saw, an alien walking on the street, you're going to be like, I'm going to need some reasons here, some proof. I don't just believe things like that. So when someone says, oh, I trained for 3 hours, my first question is, why? Or let me see what your workout looks like. Right? And it probably not good. But if someone is trying to rush out of the gym after 30 minutes because there's some kind of cortisol issue or something, I think all that's, sort of mistaken. I'll put it to you this way. If you're training hard and you got like a 3 to 6 day split, you're going to be training between an hour and 2 hours at a time. Anything much less than that, why the hell did you show up to the gym? Anything much more than that, and you're doing what's called junk volume.
Dr. Israetel, if someone's training longer than 2 hours, a better question to ask would be, what does your phone camera roll look like? They probably took like 30 selfies.
110%. Taking selfies is really the point of the gym. I only do the gym to take selfies. I'll put it to you this way. If there are no mirrors, I don't train.
I agree. Yeah, you got to mire yourself, right? That's it. It's all about 100%. Miring yourself, try bicep curls. I had a user question. You want me to ask it, Trevor, and you can finish up the show?
I got 2 questions, so let's do 5 minutes per question.
So you want to go? This is my question. This is the user question. Injury prevention and injury recovery. What are some secrets to that? And I'm talking about the top 2 or 3 injuries that we typically get in the weight room.
Yeah. Don't do partial range of motion lifting. Don't go excessively heavy when your program does not demand it. And never heave or jerk weight around. Never train when you're very sore or very tired. So people who are like, oh yeah, my quads are still lit up. Like, fuck it, let's squat heavy. Bad idea. And when your quads are really sore, there are actually micro tears in them. And if you stress them a lot, they could become more than micro. So those are the big ways to avoid not getting hurt. Another one is deloading. So every month or 2 months or so, you should have an intentionally very easy and light week so that your body systems can recover to produce another several months of good training. If you always train hard, little tiny micro tears don't all heal within the week, and they start to accumulate over the multiple weeks. After several months, you have some pretty nasty tears in your tendons, etc., that you can't even feel because there's not enough nerve cells to tell you that kind of information. And all of a sudden, you get hurt. You don't know why, because you've been pushing it too much for too long. A very, very almost linear analogy is taking your car in for a checkup and refilling the oil every whatever 1,000 number of miles. Now, can you go longer than that and your car will be just fine? Totally. But at some point, you're going to be driving through Arizona and your car is just going to fucking stop. And there's going to be 100 miles each direction with nobody, and you're going to be in real deep shit. So being proactive about taking breaks from training, or hard training rather, is one of the big quote-unquote secrets to making sure that you stay injury-free.
And real quick, recovery. Everyone complains, oh, I'm sore. How do I recover from being sore? Is there a trick to that? Because in all my years, the only trick I've learned is sleep. Yeah. Just try to get more sleep. That's the only trick. I've tried everything. I've tried bathing in homeopathic oils and all this shit. Is there a trick I'm missing besides sleep?
Totally. You got to drink the oils, man. I can't believe you're that dumb. You know?
The snake oil. You got to drink snake oil.
Exactly. I actually eat snakes exclusively as a protein source. So, yeah, you nailed it. You know, it's sleep, relaxation, consistent eating, and eating plenty of food and plenty of protein. And recovery simply doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't happen quickly. So, for example, if you get really sore and you eat well and you sleep well, you might heal a day earlier. You know, if you're sore for 4 days, you might otherwise sort of heal in 3. But there's nothing that's you're going to take or a magic pill that like you're max. So you guys know like quad delayed onset soreness where you can barely walk. There's nothing you can take that's just going to eliminate that over a period of hours or a day. Just nothing at all. So you got to do your best to eat, sleep, etc. And there's really no magic in recovery whatsoever. And also, I'll put it to you this way. Having delayed onset muscle soreness and being under recovered is in part because your body's adapting. So when you're quote unquote recovering, that's all good and well. But another thing you want to be doing is actually growing muscle. That takes time, and it just plain old does. So when people are like, oh man, I want to like squat tomorrow, I want to recover by tomorrow, like why not just eat and sleep and let your body recover in its own due time so that it grows muscle, and then you squat when your body's healed, not the other way around. It kills me when people sort of decide to squat 3 times a week and they're like, I got to do what it takes to heal. Either reduce the volume of training because it's too much, or let the body take the time it needs to recover.
I gotta tell you something funny, doctors. You're gonna get a good laugh out of this. So often during my workouts, I'll drink an electrolyte drink. It's basically just like a sugar-free electrolyte powder. It's basically expensive salt water when it really comes down to it. But anyways, there's this young kid at the gym. And he's always coming up to me asking for, workout advice and diet advice.
For advice he'll never take.
Yeah, but like, he's just a young kid. So I always give him advice, free of charge and everything, right? So he comes up to me one day as I'm at the water fountain. He's like, so I got to ask, man, like what's in that water bottle you're always drinking? Man. And I'm like, if I tell you, you're not going to tell anyone, right? He's like, yeah, I promise. I'm like, it's an extract of bovine testicles. And he just looks at me like, oh man, I got the secret now. So I didn't see this kid for a couple of days. And then he comes back to me. He's like, what website are you ordering this from? Because I've been Googling it and I can't seem to find it anywhere. And I've been asking around and I was like, dude, I was just joking with you, man. But it's kind of, everyone's looking for that secret magic elixir that's going to somehow boost their recovery.
That's the ticket, man. He's going to know not to listen to anything you say from now on, or he's going to be like, well, are you serious? Yeah, there is a magic elixir for recovery. It's called anabolic androgenic steroids. In order for them to greatly improve your recovery, you have to take a whole lot of them, which not so slowly, but surely destroys your health and your sanity. So there is no magic to that. And really, it's just about being diligent. And funny enough, all the bodybuilders that are super gigantic and super successful, yeah, most of them take steroids, but they also do the stuff that sleeping and eating, etc. There's not a damn bodybuilder out there that's any good that just takes drugs and ignores everything else. All the guys winning the Mr. Olympia, etc., they're doing all the other stuff right too.
So we'll finish off the show. Dr. Robert Villa has 2 questions for you. His first question is, how can one include things like myo-sets into their weekly volume? And how do you account for them in terms of sets? Would it be considered 1 set or 2 to 3 sets, as it's more taxing overall than a typical straight single set?
Yeah. So myo reps is basically when you almost reach failure, take several seconds break, and then continue lifting the same weight, almost reach failure again, break again, so on and so forth. There is a way that James Krieger, who's a statistician and a hypertrophy researcher, has just summarized in a talk of his, and it's going to be available online pretty soon. It's a very, very sort of advanced mathematical method to sort of gauge how hard the sets are, how hard the reps are, and it tells you how much sort of effective work you're doing. But short of that, which is probably a very good method of doing it, I would say that, what you want to do is take, as a very shorthand method, take your myo reps, see how many reps total you got, split that up into sets based on the intensity. So for example, let's say you did 1 set of, 20 reps, and then you did a sum total of 20 reps after that, myo rep style. So all of them pretty close to failure. Is that 2 sets of 20? Well, no, not really, because the other reps are more fatiguing. So I would say you could account for that from somewhere between 1.5 to 2 times the set number that the first set was. So if it's 20 reps you got on the first myo set, and then a myo rep set, and then you got 20 more over the next multiple sets, what I would do is I would count, instead of 2 sets of 20, which you could, I would count it as 2 sets of 20 and then a set of 10, or even 3 sets of 20. If you do that, then I think it's adjust accurately enough to get you a good representation of both how much stimulus you're experiencing and how much fatigue you're experiencing.
And then his second question is, also based on Dr. James Krieger's recent talk at the JPS conference, what is his take on how to implement excursion load into calculating one's volume per block? How has it changed your outlook on determining an athlete's MAV and MRV?
It hasn't, because I haven't implemented that, because I haven't examined the mathematics behind it yet. But I will eventually. It's a very interesting concept. There are actually multiple ways to go about doing what was done there. So exertion load. That was actually the concept I was just referencing in the answer. So I think if you want to use that to proxy your volume landmarks, then I think that's a very, very good idea. I would say, because it is a new idea, be skeptical, be open-minded, try it and see if it's accurate. If it's causing you all kinds of problems or the predictive validity of your training, don't use it. If it is turning out to be a very, very good indicator of fatigue, then I would jump on it. So give it a try.
Steve, do you have any closing questions for Dr. Israetel?
Let me ask you this question really quick. What causes soreness after a workout? Is it just the muscle fibers being broken down and inflammation by the body, or is there something else that causes it?
Yeah, it's mostly the latter. So the direct muscle fiber damage is not very extensive. Usually doesn't feel like much of anything. As a matter of fact, if you take enough anti-inflammatories during and after hard training, you don't really get a whole lot of delayed onset muscle soreness.
But who started that myth, that bro science that it's lactic acid? Was it some doctor like many years ago I read?
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. So lactic acid, when it is acutely present in high concentrations in muscle, causes pain. So that makes some sense. And then also, when you reach close to failure and when you do a high volume of training, you actually get a lot of lactic acid secreted in the muscle and around it. So, in some way, it actually, through metabolic signaling, may signal hypertrophy and may do its own kind of damage that leads to a greater immune infiltration. But if you're training super hard, you're going to get both a lot of lactic acid and you're going to get the signaling cascade for the immune system to come in. So maybe something got lost in translation where somebody said, well, I think the lactic acid is signaling this delayed onset muscle soreness. Maybe somebody said, oh, it's just the lactic acid that's still in there. So now that's a very charitable view. The not so charitable view is bros are fucking retarded and just made up some term and heard something. Oh, lactic acid hurts, and that's what's causing soreness. Who the fuck knows? But it's not.
I've heard a 19-year-old told me the other day. He's like, you got to flush out the lactic acid if you feel sore. Flush it out.
Yeah, but that's insane. The very easy way to refute that is you ask him, do you think that lactic acid causes pain? And he'd say, of course. Be like, do you think lactic acid is present in high concentrations at the end of a set, which is why it hurts? He'd be like, totally. He'd be like, all right, why the fuck does it go away for a day and a half and then come back when you're actually sore? You do not get sore right after training. And at that point, the hilarity ensues as that person tries to think for maybe the first time in their life.
It's kind of like a rainbow. It goes away and comes back.
That's easily the nicest thing anyone's ever said about delayed onset muscle soreness.
So Dr. Israetel, I really appreciate you coming on this podcast. Do you work with people one-on-one? Like, I know you're extremely busy. Do you currently take clients?
No, I haven't taken clients in a very long time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm sure all of our listeners who wanted to hire you are now going like, well, that sucks.
Yeah, I'm always ready to disappoint. That's one thing I'm very good at.
For our list, do you sell, like, I want you to plug your services. Do you sell ebooks or anything like that? Or are you just on here just to be a nice guy?
So I have a whole company with my co-founder, Nick Shaw. It's called Renaissance Periodization. It's a lot of things to spell. So just find us on Instagram at RP Strength. We have a crap load of followers. We make programs to help people put on muscle, burn fat. We make diets. We write a whole lot of books where you can learn about all this sort of deeper intellectual stuff and all that good stuff. And the Instagram page will link to the website and everything else you want to know. So at RP Strength. If you like looking at pictures of semi-naked guys, then at RPDRMIKE is my own Instagram. And you can find... I'm known very well for really shitty pictures of food. Like the food porn, people are like, oh, I'm eating chicken and rice. And I'm like, wow, that looks so good. My pictures never come out looking good. It's embarrassing. Come laugh at me at RP Dr. Mike. And then I'm on Facebook, Mike Israetel. It's a public account. I answer a lot of questions on there and post educational content all the time.
Dr. Israetel, I'm the same way. I mean, I don't have 10 minutes to make my meal plated and make sure the lighting's perfect and then find a filter. I take a photo, I post it, and then I get on with my day.
That's all you motherfuckers get. You know what, man? I'm not even well educated enough. There's a whole art and science to the shit. Like, I'm not a photographer, goddammit. I'm a sports scientist. You want photography of food? Go on fucking pages for that shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've never once used a filter in any of my photos. It's just, I'm so simple. I don't have time. Like, I'm sure I could learn it if I cared. I'm just post, done, on with my life.
Agreed.
So Dr. Mike Israetel, we really appreciate you coming on. This is a really informative episode. For your host, Trevor Kouritzin, for my co-host, Steve Smee, this has been another episode of Evolutionary Radio. Live your life, look good doing it. Thanks for listening. you.